Okay, so the plan today is to, again, explore the file sharing with what's SMB stand for? Who can tell me what SMB stands for? Samba. Who gets the answer first? You can search if you like. Search your memory or search the internet. What is it, Luke? Haven't found it yet? Server message block. Yes. SMB, otherwise referred to as Samba in the Linux system. And remember how we share files from Microsoft to other systems is using Samba. We set the properties of file to be sharing. And remember, there's two types of permissions. There's sharing permissions, and there is the actual security permissions. Similar to Linux or Unix, where you can set your permissions and ownership, and then when we do sharing, we can specify is it read-only or writable, and who is the user actually writing to it. But when you look up server message block on Microsoft's site, they give you a few more details of what SMB does. It's not just for file sharing. And they mentioned a few things. I had to go back and research what they actually meant here as I read through their details. One thing they mentioned is dialect negotiation is incorporated into server message block. And I look at that thing, what in the world? Well, basically, there are improvements over SMB, server message block, and they have versions 1, 2, 3, and they're building up. But they like to call them dialects. I'm not sure why they don't just use the word version, but dialects is the various versions of server message block. And dialect negotiation, what does that sound like? What does that mean to you? One machine's kind of share a file with another, and there's dialect negotiation. You can kind of guess what that means?
Yeah, the versions are different and so on.
Yeah, the versions may be different, so they communicate, telling each other, by the way, I'm using this version, and the one using version 3, if it sees the other system is using version 2, the version 3 system should negotiate and only use the version 2 commands, so they know what commands are available with older versions. Backward compatibility or previous version compatibility, they like to call it dialect negotiation. I would have called it version protocol, version sharing information. So that's one aspect of server message block with Microsoft. They can locate other servers. That's using the NetBIOS kind of thing. They actually share their names where they are, and they advertise, hey, I have server message block available. Anyone wants to use this through network browsing capability. Is that a security issue? That could be a security problem. You don't want to be advertising unless, but then you're trading off usability. Sometimes it's convenient to know, oh, here's a share over here that says public files or classroom files or student forums. Those might be useful if you're browsing the network. I tend to avoid sharing in or letting people browse, and I add the $ to my share names. So if they are browsing, they can't see my share. There's probably a way they could find it, but the normal browsing of the network, you won't see my share. It also supports printing over the network. So you can actually, when you actually have a printer, make it available to other systems. It's using server message block to actually share the printer information. So server message block is a nice way to make printers available. And did we do that? Did we share a printer and connect to a printer? I don't remember if we did that. Maybe we'll come back and do that. I was thinking of going over the basics, file structure, and basic operating system issues. and just learning the operating system. But I think we might come back and, as part of an exercise, share a printer, both from Windows and Unix, so you're familiar with that. Because remember, when you're supporting, helping people with their PCs, often it's those mundane things of I need to connect to a printer. For the 10th time, the printer isn't working, and figure out how to make it work. Share access authentication. I mentioned that a little bit, where you can say it's shared. I usually put everyone full access in the sharing permission, but I could actually designate specific users. That's what the authentication is about. And I can specify, even underneath the share, additional authentication permissions on subdirectories. File and record locking, just as though it's a local machine on the system. You know, the system can actually keep track of how many locks are on the file and not let go of it until the locks are gone. Sometimes locking is used to keep more than one person from editing the same file. Sometimes it's useful for the system to say, I'm not going to let go of this, I'm not going to eject or disconnect if the system senses someone seems to have a file open. So multiple users could have file locks. System won't let go, won't let you disconnect without saying, sure you want to do this? Some users may lose access to your file. This is very useful for logging. I know that something has changed. Something within a directory has changed. I can see the date of the directory change. Multiple attributes, Unicode supports. You know what Unicode is? This is something that maybe, well, they may have touched on it in hardware in some of the intro courses, but it is a big deal out there. And let's go look at what Unicode is. We'll jump back to Samba. How many have heard of Ascii? Ascii, A-S-C-I, I remember what the American character something. Basically, it's a way of representing what you type on the keyboard into storage on the disk. Ascii is the most common, but Microsoft refers to it as a single byte character set. For some reason, they just wouldn't use Ascii because that is one example of a character set mapped to 8 bits, single byte character set. This was how computers kept data, text files, for years and years. And it worked great. And it was used so often that some of us actually have some of the codes memorized. Like 41 is where the capital A's begin. And when I want to figure out what you're typing, I see the code and I can figure out, well, I subtract what letter A is, and if I have a 60 minus 41, that gives me 29 or 19, and the 19th letter in the alphabet is what 60 would stand for. So I can easily figure out the rest of the alphabet knowing at least A. And I can send special characters, like the number 7, I know rings the bell. And yes, some of us nerds had some of those memorized, even the control characters. But when you're dealing with other languages that have more than 26 letters or numbers or symbols, be very flexible. Unicode has introduced, rather than a 8-bit for UTF-8, a 16-bit and a 32 bits, representing a ton more possible codes to handle different languages, such as Chinese, that has crazy symbols representing letters that can be represented in Unicode. And the ASCII is mapped to the Unicode 32-bit somewhere in Microsoft's tables. I haven't investigated to memorize the UTF-32. That'd be a few more numbers than I'm ready to memorize. Well, you could work on the UTF-16. Those are basically a standard way of encoding files. So when you'll be running across Unicode or UTF, it's just a more universal encoding of a file. All right, let's go back to how we share a file in Samba. And remember the steps. You have to first go to the particular directory and have sharing enabled, establish a share name, and then there will be some user on your Windows system. You'll need to know how are they going to get to it. So you'll have to make a note of a particular user. The domain I typically use as workgroup. But let's check. Let's you find out. Find out what is your domain name in your system. Remember how to do that? Workgroup is the standard domain for a local user, but how do I know, is my computer even in a domain? Here's how to find out. You go to right-click on this PC under Windows Explorer, and you go look at Properties. And when Properties come up, you will see, I guess you don't see your computer name here. Oh, here you go. You see a computer name here, and I see my computer name is instructor-w8. That can also stand for your domain name. My computer here is actually part of a domain, Emmaus-local. Go ahead and go to Advanced System Settings. And underneath computer name, you should see a full computer name. And what does your domain show up as? Okay, so your domain is workgroup. So what that means is there's two ways a Windows PC can be configured for logins. With the very basic installing, you have a domain called workgroup. It's what you call your default domain. And you can actually change your domain and actually give yourself a certain workgroup rather than the default name of workgroup. The way this works out is then computers in the same workgroup can share files a little more conveniently. When you get an organization more than, well, Microsoft recommends about more than 10 people in a work group, they recommend using what they call domain services, or another term we use is Active Directory. That's a huge step in Windows login capabilities that you learn about if you're going to manage a Windows server. And a big part of learning Windows Server is learning Active Directory. And just to give you a taste of it, what that means is any computers that are joined to a domain, such as a domain mybusiness.com, that I've created a server that's managing that Active Directory. From Active Directory, I can establish all the logins from the server. And anyone in the company can go on a computer that's in that domain, they can log in to that computer. And they don't have to go to each computer, create a new user. Remember how you created users? I can do that at the domain level, and any computer in the domain has access. Those users have access. So it's like a large corporation can control everyone and their users and policies, like when you have to change your password, what you're allowed to see, your access to any computer and folders on the system, on the organization system, in their domain. So Active Directory is one of the first things you'll learn as you get into Windows Server management. And it's really not that hard. It's, if you can handle setting up user permissions locally, the group policy is how they do it in Active Directory. But because it does get fairly complex and you have a lot of power there, there's plenty of other things to learn. And then the next thing is, when it stops working, welcome to the chaos, because it's so powerful. There's lots of ways that things can go wrong. And it's interacts with DNS and NetBIOS and all sorts of crazy things, making group policy, people that know group policy and Active Directory, again, can make lots of money, because managing a Windows server and understanding the changes are worth a lot of money to corporations, because that controls everyone's access. So back to your system, then in the setting up of Windows here, your permissions are handled. The domain part, we just use workgroup. If we join a domain, we can actually use that domain name and the domain user and password. So that's set up in the share. And remember, there's the two tabs. There's the sharing tab and then the actual file permissions. And then if you want to access it from a Unix machine, remember on that local Unix machine, you create the mount point, such as I like to use /mnt/ the name of the machine I'm connecting to. And then in the Linux system, you use the mount command as super user. The address of the Windows system that is sharing a file, the name of the share, including the $sign if it is in there, and then your mount point. That's how we do it from Linux to Windows. Now, how do we do it from Linux to Linux? That's what we're going to talk about next. It gets a little more complicated. So fire up your Mint system, and let's have you go through this as we talk about it. Fire up your Mint system, and you're going to need to be a root user to edit your Ascii exports file. And I'm going to go connect over to my Mint system and follow along with you, because I did this on a separate system now, and I mounted it and I connected to it from my Mint system. Now I'm going to do the same thing from the Mint system with you. So I have to remote connect to my machine number 25. And see, since none of our machines in our classroom are joined to a domain, I could either try to remember the machine name and put it in front of my user, or I just use the default work group because I know they've left the default. Then I have my local user on that machine. And here's my Mint system, and I'll log into there. Oops. Now, this might be easier. Rather than go through this window, I'm going to putty into my Mint system because I can see the console a little better. So I'm going to start up putty instead. Although a remote desktop sometimes is handy. Let me start up putty, and I'm going to putty over to that. And I think I have it in my list here. Oh, I thought I did. I'm going to connect to 10.128.9.25 is my Mint system. And just so I remember that next time, I'm going to save it as a Mint-25. And I'm going to save that. And now I'll connect by hitting open. There I am in my Mint system. I'm going to log in. Okay, so with those instructions up there, let me follow the instructions on my Mint system now. So what we're going to need to do is edit that Ascii exports file. And then if I ever want to see what is currently mounted or make it permanent, I can actually edit the Ascii FS tab file. Then there's this additional sysconfig NFS file. I'm not sure if that's the actual location on Linux Mint. We'll have to check. Let's first edit that exports file. And I'm going to increase my font size. I want to make it a little bigger for you here. Settings, appearance, fonts. I'm going to make that a little bigger. All right, so I need to edit the Ascii exports file. And remember, I have to be super user to do that, so I do a sudo, and I'm going to use the VI editor, Ascii exports. Oops. Uh-oh, they don't have an entry for me. When I did this on the other system, it had some nice comments in there giving me a little bit of help. Let me connect to that machine and show you the little bit of help I got. because it was pretty handy little comments. I thought you were going to see that. I'm going to bring up PuTTY to my other machine that I have this working on and use that as reference. Let's see if that's the right. 9 is There we go. This is the one I had it working on, and rather than rederive this, I'm just going to look at the comments that were in the exports file on that system. This was Ubuntu, had an empty, well, had an exports file with some comments explaining what the entries should look like. I love configuration files like that, and see, you can do that yourself with comments. Make it helpful for the next person that comes along to edit this file. They give you an example of how we would use the exports file, as well as you can go to the internet and search for exports. So I'm going to, just to put the comments in here, I'm going to copy that from one PuTTY. All right, oops. Do that again more. I forgot that with PuTTY, just selecting it copies it. And I'm going to come up here and I for insert and right click. Now I have some comments in there. And you'll see the entry that I made. This is the location of where on my local system I'm going to be sharing my files with other Unix or Linux systems. So this is like the reverse mount point. This is the share location. Now I could point this to an actual file anywhere on my system, I believe, but in the examples I see, they recommend sharing it from this SRV folder. And escape and :WQ will save that file. When I look at it again, there's the two entries that matter. The comments are optional. Those are the entries that matter. And let's look at what this is. This says this is going to, oh, I have a mistake here. I want this one to be read-only. So I'm going to change that WRO to make RO to be a read-only folder. These other parameters have to do with how NFS works with the, negotiates the file access with the other Unix or Linux system. And this is a very low security measure, and we'll learn what this is about. This is a bad thing, but because I was looking at an example that had this, I copied it blindly. And then as I was reading about NFS security, I realized this is a really bad thing to do. But we'll find out why it's a really bad thing to do and show how this enables hacking into my system. So by default, this thing called root squash is enabled. So just for now, I'm going to leave it not enabled so you can see what happens when it's not enabled. And remember what I'm doing. I'm telling my system the file location on my system that's located at srv/cs230-r0 is going to be shared. This little star asterisk means share it to any system that asks me for a share. This is who it's being shared to. In the parentheses is the extra parameters to the share. So RO means it's going to be a read-only share. cs230-RW is going to be read-write with the same extra permissions and shared to anyone. Okay, so I'm going to quit from that file, escape, WQ. It saves the contents. Now, I'm not even sure I actually have NFS sharing enabled, and I forget what the command is to enable it. It's something like NFS server. So I'm going to have to go look that up, find out what the actual command is under Mint. We're under Debian. So let's look up Debian NFS sharing configure. Where is my browser? There it is. So we'll look up on my search here, find that window, Debian NFS share enable. And let's see if these directions are helpful. And go ahead, bring up a browser and do a search and just do a search for NFS share Debian. And let's see if this is helpful at all. Yes, we have to get some software to make it work. Since we are the server side here, we need to make sure these programs are available. These packages are installed. NFS Common and NFS Kernel Server. So the easiest thing to do is just copy that command, doing a copy, and then go over to PuTTY, and I'm going to do sudo and paste that command. And if it's already there, my system will just say, oh, that package is already installed. Oh, but I forgot, I need to do one more thing before I do this. Remember what you do before you ever do an apt get when you haven't done one before? Do an apt get update. Just to make sure you're getting the latest version of everything when you ask for it. So I'm going to do an apt get update, and then I'll come back there and do the apt get of those packages. Always do that when you're looking to add a new package. Run an update first. That basically updates the list of packages that you need. And it shouldn't take too long. So sudo apt get -update. Sorry, sudo apt get space update space -y to answer yes, I want to get it. And down comes our updates. Now I can do that sudo apt-get install these two packages, nfs-kernel-server and nfs-common. Those two packages enable NFS, Network File System. Okay, so now I'm going to do that. If it's already there, it will say, oh, package already installed. Go ahead. But I see, oh, I hadn't installed it yet. Now I will do the yes, I do want to continue. Install those packages. I'm going to go ahead and see, remember how I'd edited exports? It looks like on the install, it puts in an export template. I'm going to go ahead and install that because I can always update it again. So I'm going to, and I'm curious what it'll look like when they install it fresh. So I'm going to install the package maintainers version, and I'm going to, well, it doesn't give me what's my option. I'm going to do one again. Yeah. Okay, so there it installed it. Now let's see what it did to Ascii exports. There we go. So that's when it got the example in there. I still have my other PuTTY sitting here showing me how I had it configured on the other system, which has those lines there. I'm going to type it in by hand just to help me remember how it all works. So I'm going to go back and do sudo vi Ascii exports. I had forgotten I hadn't installed my package on my MIT system. A to append to what's there. And now I put in my plans. This is a file I'm going to create on this system, srv cs230-ro. One's going to be a read-only. I'm going to tab over and say everyone can access it, all machines can access it, and then R0, sorry, RO, sync, and I'm going to do the insecure no root squash. I'm going to share another folder. Often people will name these public, and escape colon WQ. All right, so now I have installed the packages. I re-edited exports just to remind me what's in exports. Do more of it. And that last line is the important. Those last two lines are actually active. But there's something that needs to happen once I change that exports. And in the configuration instructions, we see that once I do that, I have to tell it the permissions on, let's see, I have to edit the permissions, and there I tell the server on my end, let's increase that size there for you so you can read that. On my end of the server, I have to tell it, hey, I've edited the restarts, run this program, NFS kernel server restart. So once the exports properly configured, I can try this. What have I forgot? What's not ready yet? I've told it to share these folders, but I haven't created those folders yet. Just like in Windows, you tell it and an existing directory to share. Well, in Linux, you tell the server, I'm going to be sharing this folder, but that folder better exists. So I'm going to go sudo mkdir those folders that I want to share, SRV. So I'm going to make the SRV folder. Oh, it's already there. SRV. The two files I don't want, the two empty folders I'm going to share. Well, actually, they don't have to be empty. That's the read-only version. There's the rewrite version. I'm creating those, and now when I copy and paste this as super user, I can do sudo that command. That will tell my sharing computer that yes, I want to share the files